What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be a difficult video. Just letting you know now, it is about the death of Melissa Platt, and right now, her cause of death has been determined, manner of death was labeled undetermined, and the case has been closed. But family and a lot of different people believe that this 31-year-old woman is actually the victim of some serious domestic abuse. So I've been working very closely with Melissa's sister, Michelle. I know that you may have seen coverage on this case already in the true crime community. She is reaching out to everyone she can to raise awareness on her sister's case, not only to hopefully have movement in it and have it reopened, but also to spread awareness about domestic violence and ways that, we can maybe help people in our community. Now, before I dive into this case, I want to say quite literally the biggest thank you to Audible for sponsoring today's video. Days like today, I'm very thankful for Audible because the true crime community, again, it's very difficult to sponsor videos. Not a lot of companies want to sponsor this kind of content, and the ones that do make the largest difference because it allows YouTube true crime creators like myself to spend all of our time trying to help families like this and trying to make a difference. So Audible will always have a special place in my heart. I've said this once before, they're always so supportive of the true crime content. But for those of you who aren't even aware of what Audible is and haven't heard me say that spiel before, Audible is an amazing online service that provides you with a massive selection of audiobooks, Audible originals, podcasts, and more. Pretty much anything that you need to stay informed, educated, and entertained. I know that I personally love to listen to audiobooks for educational purposes. I love to learn new things. But I also really love to use Audible to listen to books that have something to do with the cases that I'm covering. And right now I'm currently listening to the audiobook Submerged. And you may recognize the name of that, and it's because I brought it up a few videos back in my two-part series on Sarah and Ryan Widmer. And that particular audiobook goes into this idea that Sarah Widmer was actually suffering from some sort of medical condition. And I really urge every single one of you to go and listen to this audiobook because there were so many wildly different opinions on those videos. I have people that strongly believe he's guilty, people that don't believe he's guilty at all. I have medical professionals that were like, this medical diagnosis is spot on. So it definitely brings a new perspective into everything, and this medical perspective that I feel like hasn't quite been explained enough. And also it really dives deep into the different police records and bits of information that I was not personally able to get my hands on. But there's so much more than true crime on Audible as well. There's a genre for pretty much anyone, and they also work very hard to do the absolute most for their members. Right now, there's an all-new Plus catalog that contains thousands and thousands of select audiobooks, originals, guided fitness, meditation. My personal favorite from the new Plus catalog is the sleep tracks, which are my jam because, as you can imagine, being in true crime all day, I kind of need something to knock me down a few levels at night. But all of that is included in your membership. Audible members on top of that also get 1 credit every single month to go towards any title on the premium selection, which is filled with bestsellers, new releases, anything you could ever hope for. All titles remain yours forever, no matter what, which is also really awesome. It's just an endless way to entertain yourself, provide some relaxation, learn something interesting and new, or maybe just escape for a little bit. You want to check out Submerge, which I highly recommend, or any of the other titles on Audible. All you have to do is go to audible.com/Danielle or text Danielle to 500-500, and you will get a free audiobook plus a 30-day free trial, which includes exploring the Plus catalog. Thank you again to Audible for always being so awesome, always being so supportive, and now on to the video. Now, as I was saying, I've been working a lot with Michelle, who is Melissa's sister, and she's provided me with all of this information. And I don't typically put trigger warnings on my videos because it's true crime, and it's just kind of understood that true crime content can be very triggering content, no matter what video it is. But in this particular one, I do want to warn you guys and do a little trigger warning, because I speak a lot about domestic violence on multiple different individuals. I also will be showing photos, very graphic photos that I've been sent by her sister, and I would not typically show or go this in depth into this kind of information, but I feel like that is the only way to really get people to understand the seriousness of this case and why it's so upsetting and honestly disturbing that nothing more was really done by authorities and that her case is now closed and been totally just dismissed. So it's important. If you can bear it, definitely watch through and share this where you can. If not, I completely understand. So I want to quickly describe Melissa through the words of her sister, Michelle, because that's obviously the best way to get a good understanding of her. And Michelle took the time to write up, who Melissa was and the things that she remembered the most. So I wanted to give that to you guys directly from her, straight from her words. Melissa had a great sense of humor and was just silly. I can vividly recall staying up late giggling about random things. She could always make me laugh no matter how down I felt at the time. She had a nurturing and caring nature, and she was very aware that she couldn't sing, but that wouldn't ever stop her from belting songs out. Me and her would make videos of us singing. One video of her, she sang Whitney Houston's version of I Will Always Love You. And we actually played it at her funeral, and I smiled and cried when it played. She loved kids and always wanted to be a mom, and she did eventually have 2 daughters. She was so proud of her first job as well as a teenager at McDonald's, where she would host birthday parties for kids. She absolutely loved that job and took pride in her work. She was a natural beauty. She had a huge crush on Jordan Knight from New Kids on the Block. We would stay up way past our bedtimes and watch scary movies and then have nightmares just to turn around and do the same thing again. She was a blast to be around. I miss my sister every day. A piece of my heart was ripped out and will never be healed. I had such a good bond. 2 peas in a pod, we'd be called. She was older than me and was very protective. She would always give you the shirt off of her back if she knew it would help you. That's how big of a heart she had. That's just the kind of person that Melissa was. She was always happy. She was always making people smile. She was always so giving to everyone. To kind of backtrack more, she was born on February 3rd, 1977 in Houston, Texas to Michael and Marion Mims. And she had 2 sisters, Michelle and Maria, and she also had a brother, Michael. And she spent most of her life in Houston, Texas, at least her early childhood. She lived there from when she was born until she was 8, when her family moved to Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is an area I am very familiar with. And she lived there between the ages of 8 to 12 until moving back to Baytown, Texas, where she lived a lot of life with her family and her siblings, where most of those different events were described. I've seen that she loved to go to her grandmother's house and bake cookies, and she would jump off of the roof onto a mattress or slide downstairs on a piece of cardboard. So she was just that like daredevil, always having fun, living life to the fullest kind of person. Like her sister mentioned in that little excerpt from her, she did get a job at McDonald's when she was 15 years old. She was in charge of all the birthday parties, and being such like a kid at heart herself, she had the time of her life at that job. And then when she was 16, she made a pretty big decision to move back to Jacksonville, North Carolina. Her sister Maria was there at the time with her children, and so Melissa went to live with her and babysit the kids, which just meant a lot of time playing and hanging out with her nieces and nephews, which again was right up her alley. She loved kids, she loved her family. On October 1st, 1995, Melissa had her first daughter, Brianna, or Brianna, I'm not sure which way it's pronounced, and then on July 4th, 2003, she had her second daughter, Chastity. I know that she was married from 2001 to 2005, but unfortunately that did end in divorce. And it seems like towards the end of that, she started to struggle with a few things. I don't know too much about her history during that time period living in Jacksonville, but in 2005, she ended up being found guilty of writing worthless checks back in 2004 in Onslow County, which is where Jacksonville, North Carolina is. And she did end up on probation because of this. But it seems like, you know, she was having run-ins with the law. I know that she did eventually go on to struggle with alcohol. And I also know that her 2 daughters ended up being under the care of someone else. I think it was someone on the paternal side of the family. I don't know any of that information, so I'm not going to speculate, but it just does seem like she was genuinely struggling with something at the time. Shortly after this divorce in 2005, by 2006, Melissa ended up meeting a man named Joey Tyndall. I don't know the age he was at the time he met her. I just do know that he was a decent bit older than her. And they met at an auto parts store in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where Melissa was working. I believe he worked driving big trucks for contracting companies at the time, and they hit it off. Eventually, Melissa ended up living with Joey in a single wide on Rex Howard Road in Pink Hill, North Carolina, which is like, I know the area, so I'm like trying to describe it the best way I can. It's like an outskirting farming town close to Jacksonville. Jacksonville is like the largest town closest to that. Maybe you can consider Kinston a larger town closer to Pink Hill, but a lot of the area this happened in is like East Coast farmland, North Carolina. So it's just a bunch of open fields, random houses, and towns with like one stoplight. And that's exactly what Pink Hill is. I think their population now is 511, and it pretty much has not changed since this happened. So very small area, and while this seemed to be like a fresh start for Melissa, it turned out to be anything but that. It was clear from the start that Melissa and Joey's relationship was centered around alcohol, and Joey himself allegedly drank a lot of liquor, and then he also had the tendency to drink liquor while he took Paxil, which is an antidepressant. And according to what Melissa would tell family, he became very violent when he would do this. And the drinking wasn't just something that started right then for him. According to interviews that I've listened to with his own children and things that I've heard from Melissa's family, this goes back a very long time. He had always had an issue with drinking. He had always had an issue with violence while drinking. Melissa typically would drink beer, but he roped her into this lifestyle of drinking liquor. And I think that paired with kind of a struggling position she seemed to be in, we all know that's not a good match at all. And she started to spiral down this really dark hole. She was drinking liquor, according to different witnesses, every single day. And she kind of realized this was an issue, and she started to talk to her family about how scared she was of the road she was going down and how bad her drinking was getting, and that she just felt so out of control, and that she kind of was feeling pressure to just drink all the time. And then there comes a certain point where it's not really your choice much anymore. It becomes an addiction, and you cannot stop yourself. So it was heading that way, and she decided to check herself into the Onslow County Behavioral Health Clinic in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I'm not sure exactly how many times she attempted to get help for this. I've heard through interviews that this was, one of a few other attempts, but I was never able to really confirm. All I know is this time she checked herself in, she told her family she was scared, and she wanted to change. She'd apparently gone back to Texas either 1 or 2 times, from my understanding, to try to kind of clean herself up and live a better life. She would frequently kind of break up with Joey. It was not a healthy relationship. It was toxic. She would end up back there, and he would kind of bring her right back. You can kind of see this manipulative, abusive circle already starting to spin. If you are someone who has been in an abusive relationship before, or you're very familiar with what they can be like, immediately, without me even having to say too much, I'm sure you're picking up these little red flags. Now, I've heard that her trip to the Onslow County Behavioral Health Clinic did not last very long. Again, my understanding is that she was only there for a few days. According to family members, she checked herself out pretty shortly after arriving and said that it was because of threats from Joey. According to what Melissa told her family, Joey told her that he would kick her out if she continued going to rehab, that he would kick her out if she stopped drinking. And this was not anything new. Melissa had confided in her sisters and her family a handful of times at this point that this was kind of his thing, that whenever she would do something that he wouldn't like, he would typically kick her out. And I mean, not even just like I'm going to kick you out, go live somewhere else. She had nowhere else to go. He would literally throw her out of the house and leave her outside to sleep in the front yard, or if a car happened to be unlocked, she would sleep in the back. I've read of an instance where one time he kind of pushed her out the front door and locked it, so she tried to find a window to get back in. He shoved her out of that as well, so she had to sleep in the back seat of a car that night. And that's kind of how he would keep his control on her, is he would kick her out the second that she did something he didn't like, because he knew she had no other options and she would stay. When you add addiction to that, struggling with alcohol, it's a recipe for disaster, and that's exactly what this turned into. So apparently Joey came and picked Melissa up from Onslow County Health Clinic, this rehab, and the first stop he made was to an ABC store. Again, just perpetuating this you have to drink or you're in trouble sort of mentality. And then he immediately took her home and made her a drink. So it's understandable that she felt very isolated and really wasn't able to do much to get herself out of the situation, because her family was still living in Texas. It was her only hope at the time for shelter, her only hope at the time for care, and he seemed to just be dangling it in front of her on a string under the conditions that she remain an alcoholic. Despite her family kind of begging her to stay with them when she could, and despite trying to give her options out, manipulation is just a thing that's not explainable unless you've lived through it. And Joey just had this hold on her that she couldn't shake. So on Wednesday, October 8th, 2008, things went really bad. Melissa's mother, Marion, ended up putting in a call to her probation officer, John Murray, because she was very concerned about Melissa's well-being. Melissa was someone who consistently spoke to her family. It seems like they were pretty much her only lifeline while she felt stuck and isolated at this home with Joey in the position she was in, so she remained in constant contact, and they hadn't heard from her in over a week. And it was already abnormal for her to not call them, but they started to call her because of this, and either would get no answer during the day, or when they would call, Joey would answer, and he would always have a new excuse as to why Melissa couldn't come to the phone. And I mean, we're talking at sometimes multiple times a night, they're calling. He always says, oh, she can't come to the phone right now. So after a while of really starting to push him and ask why she can't come to the phone, this isn't making sense, he just stopped answering the phone altogether. So her family started to just leave voicemails trying to get in contact with her. And then shortly after this, Joey also turned off the voicemail answering service. So they pretty much had absolutely no way to contact her. So they decided they needed to call the probation officer to check in on her and make sure everything was all right. At around 5:17 p.m. that Wednesday, John Murray arrived at the home and knocked on the door, but he was not receiving any sort of answer. And again, I don't think she had a job at this time, or at least she wasn't going to it, and he was very familiar with home visits with her, so he knew that she was likely inside, and he also knew that she struggled with some health issues. And I don't know the extent of her health issues. I know that she did have like precancerous cells in her cervix. I do know that she, I think, struggled with something to do with her liver. She just had a few different medical problems, and he also had seen her a week prior, and she was clearly not doing well. She showed up for a check-in with her probation officer, and he realized she was very intoxicated, and when he did a breathalyzer, she blew a .23, so he ended up having to take her home. And if she had maintained that pattern of drinking for the entirety of that week, he was worried she was basically inside, laid out, so he decided to call the Lenoir County Sheriff's Office to assist him in trying to get in contact with her and trying to get into the home. When the first responding officer arrived, Murray explained the situation, explained how Melissa was the last time he saw her, explained her health issues, and they decided to go ahead and call Joey, because Joey was the owner of the home, and they were going to try to see, first of all, does he know if Melissa's okay? Is she in fact home? Are they just kind of worrying for no reason? And also to get permission to enter the house. Joey informed the officers when they called him that they were in fact able to go in the home, but he also told them that she was not doing well lately, that her drinking had been getting out of control, and he wasn't able to take care of her very properly. And so he had actually been in contact with her mom to try to get her some help, to try to get her back into rehab, is what he stated. But on this phone call, he didn't really indicate that anything severe was happening, just that she'd been drinking a lot and she probably was inside just drunk and passed out. So at this point, the officer and Murray entered the home through the back door, and they found Melissa in the bedroom wrapped in blankets, very thin, like sheet blankets. And from this point on, pretty much every detail in this case is so wildly disturbing. So again, here's your last warning to hop off this video if this is going to bother you. They made their presence known to Melissa and asked if she needed help, but she was pretty much unresponsive. Melissa was laid out on the bed. She was attempting to kind of like move her legs around, and it did appear that she nodded yes, that she needed help. So officers immediately called an EMS to come for assistance. While they were waiting on the EMS, they wanted to get a closer look at the situation, and what they saw was horrifying. The bed had no sheets on it whatsoever, and Melissa appeared to be wrapped in not even a sheet, but like a dust ruffle. It's like she had tried to grab what was left on the bed and warm herself up, but it was only covering the upper part of her body, and she was entirely naked from the waist down. She did have a shirt on, but she only had her head through it and one of her arms. She was shaking violently, so the officer and John Murray attempted to cover her up the best that they could, and they realized at this point that she was covered head to toe in bruises. And when they looked at the nightstand beside her, they saw that she had two different cups kind of sitting on the nightstand. One of them had a straw in it, and I think it was like a Coke can or some sort of soda can, but it was clearly filled with liquor. And then the other bottle was filled with a darker substance, which also was liquor. So she had just been drinking liquor out of a straw. The extent of the bruises on Melissa was so severe, and it was very clear that they were all of varying stages. So it's not like she had just been hurt and that was it. Like, she had almost healed bruises, bruises in the middle of healing, brand new fresh bruises. And they were so shocked that the officer immediately asked, "Did someone beat you? Like, what on earth?" And according to the officer, Melissa indicated that no, nobody had beaten her. So they asked her how on earth she got all of these injuries. And she apparently also attempted to inform, and I'm not sure what exactly that means, the officers that she tried to answer the phone and fell, hitting her head. I don't know how well she was able to really tell officers this, because they also stated that the entire time they were there, Melissa wouldn't even open her eyes, and she really appeared to be in so much pain that she couldn't even talk more than a few broken words, and it was at the most bare minimum whisper possible. At this point, EMS arrived, and at the exact same time, Joey Tyndall also showed up. The EMTs noted upon arrival that they went through the back door just like everyone else had, and upon entering, they were hit with, and I quote, "a strong smell of possible cigarette smoke and bodily fluid." So the second they walked in the door, they immediately were just struck with this horrible smell, as if someone was just sitting in their own feces and urine, and that is exactly what was happening. They also stated in their notes that when they went into the room where Melissa was, that she was unresponsive. They said if they spoke to her very loudly, she would open her eyes briefly, but then would immediately close them. The bare mattress that she was on top of, as well as pretty much most of her body, it was covered in urine and feces and blood. They also noticed as well that there was very severe bruising, but they were a little bit more specific in their notes. They stated that she had bruising all on the left side of her face, down into her jaw. She had a very bad black eye on her left eye. They even saw that there was a little bit of blood pooling in her eye. They did attempt to check inside of her mouth because her whole jaw was so swollen. But because it was so swollen, they couldn't get a good look, but they believed they saw there was some tissue damage, some soft tissue damage, and also she had damage to some of her teeth. They also noticed that she had new bruises on the left side of her neck that measured, I think, 2 by 5 inches, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know why that measurement just like has stuck in my head, but it has. But 2 by 5 inches was a big new bruise on the side of her neck. She also had older bruising all along her rib cage, all on her upper arms. There were old and new bruises covering all of her extremities that they said were just too numerous to even attempt to describe. But the worst bruise that she had was on her pelvic bones and her just lower abdominal area. It was a very, very deep, very bad bruise. And they also noticed that Many of her toes had been broken and had healed on their own at some point. They also noticed that she had a lot of the blood that I spoke about earlier was kind of coming from her vaginal area. It was coating her upper thighs. They did state that they weren't sure if this was from a sexual assault, but putting that together with the severe bruising on her pelvic bones and abdominal area, I feel like that is a huge indicator of sexual assault. Plus the fact that they found her naked from the waist down and the sheets were only covering the upper half of her body. It was a horrific scene. And one of the first responders in their notes even said it was the worst state that they had ever seen anybody in. It was clear that Melissa didn't get like this in the matter of a few hours. And it seemed very strange that Joey stated on the phone that he'd been having trouble taking care of Melissa, but he failed to mention that she was laying in a bed naked, being fed liquor through a straw in her own urine, feces, and blood. Totally unresponsive. And if he had just left for work that morning, there's just no way this happened over a few hours. And she had bruises that were ranged again from new to almost healed bruises. So they ended up pulling Joey aside to ask him about this. And Joey stated that the simple explanation for her black eye, very swollen jaw, messed up teeth, bruises on her neck, bruises on her pelvis, the fact that she couldn't even stand up or move her mouth or talk was because she fell a lot. She was a clumsy girl and she drank a lot, so she fell a lot. He said that she had been in and out of bed for the past week, since the 29th of September, and that from the day prior, from that point on, she had just solidly been in bed, which would have been a Sunday into that Monday. And he also mentioned that there had been a few incidents that could explain the severity of her injuries over the past week. So he mentioned to authorities that at some point that week she had fallen in the bathroom and she had, I guess, been trying to make a bowel movement and got it all over herself. She didn't make it to the toilet. And so she, according to him, was cleaning up or something and then fell and wedged herself between the toilet and the bathtub and got stuck there. He also said that at one point, and he didn't even have a specific time for this really, that she took the car that was in the front yard while possibly intoxicated and drove around and crashed it. But I have more. He goes way more into depth in those in interviews that I speak about in a little bit. But he had these two different excuses as to why these different injuries could have maybe happened. He decided that Melissa would be taken immediately at this point to Lenora County Hospital, and EMTs and the officers informed Joey that that's where they were taking her. But he informed them that he wasn't going to be going with her, that instead he would just stay home and call the hospital for updates. And this sits so bad with me. So on the phone, when authorities first arrived at the house to get permission to enter, Joey's saying, oh yeah, she just drinks a lot. She's fine. I just can't really take care of her very well. But doesn't seem like there's any sort of emergency. Yet at the same time, he rushes home when authorities say that they're going inside. He shows up right off the bat like it is an emergency. But then the second they do say it's an emergency and she is severely injured and this is life-threatening, he's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to go. I'm going to stay home and I'll just call for updates. It just seems a little backwards in my opinion. And knowing that domestic abuse is an allegation in this, as someone who's gone through domestic abuse, as someone who's very well aware of what abuse is like, him rushing home like that sounds like he was trying to make sure he was able to immediately plant an idea in the officer's head. And then once things got serious, he backed off. Now, again, that's just my personal opinion. That is just my personal speculation from experiences that I've personally been in. He may have been concerned, I don't know. But since domestic abuse is something that's a huge allegation in this story, I'm also going to throw out that side as well. So upon arriving to the hospital, they found that Melissa had suffered from a closed head injury from trauma and believed that she needed better care, but they just couldn't give her there. So she ended up being airlifted to Pitt Memorial Hospital, which is in Greenville, North Carolina. The hospital at this point I know that an officer went to her with her to the first hospital, but at this point, I think she kind of transferred over and they didn't follow her. But once the second hospital really got a good look at what was going on here, they called the different officers involved and said that she had a pretty serious brain injury. So Lieutenant Powell, who was actually one of the first officers to respond, ended up talking to Deputy Whitley, who was also one of the first responding officers on scene. And Deputy Whitley was told to go to Pitt Hospital to photograph Melissa's external injuries for further investigation. Staff at the hospital, once he got there, ended up informing him, she's very badly bruised and injured all over externally, but the internal injuries as well are just astronomical. So they basically raised the alarm that they believed this could be a very serious domestic violence situation. Deputy Whitley had even noted himself that when he went to Pitt Memorial Hospital, he noticed so many more bruises than he had even noticed at the house and at the first hospital. So all of these first descriptions that I'm seeing of how it is just the craziest injuries I'd ever seen were just even worse later on, if that kind of tells you. And you'll see for yourself how bad this woman was injured. So after the pictures were taken, the case ended up being taken over by two detectives, Detective Braden and Detective Herring. So while the investigation is starting into what may have happened to her, Pitt County Memorial jumped into action and they immediately gave Melissa a CT scan, which revealed that she had an intracranial hemorrhage, which can be caused from physical trauma, which is what the first hospital concluded. It can be caused from things like stroke, but in this case, this was serious physical trauma. She also had so much bruising around her jaw because her jaw was broken in two places, you guys. And they also did an electroencephalogram, which showed bihemispheric dysfunction in her brain, which they believed likely was not necessarily related to this. More than likely, it was from a use of medication. And then later on during her testing, Melissa also ended up developing respiratory failure, likely from her brain injury because oxygen just was not flowing the way that it needed to be. And she also developed tachycardia, which means that her heart was beating too fast in layman's terms. And they pretty much chalked this up to her being terrified from the stress of everything that was going on. Following day, because of the extent of her head injuries, Melissa had to undergo emergency surgery where they performed a frontal craniotomy. And while they were performing the surgery, they found a second brain bleed that happened in a prior incident. So you guys, I really hope, even if you're not like really familiar with medical injuries, that you understand that's a big deal. That's a big injury to have two separate brain bleeds from two separate incidences. This isn't something that just casually happens. This woman endured a lot of injuries, very serious ones. They also found while she was in the hospital that she had been shot at some point. I've seen that she did receive medical care for this, and she did in fact tell everyone that she shot herself. But I do have a lot of family members that are saying that they have seen the trajectory and they know more about the injury that I wasn't really capable of seeing, and that it didn't match up to her shooting herself, and that the original story that she shot herself came from Joey. So again, another thing that's just up in the air, but the things that this woman went through, you guys, the things that she went through. Melissa was clearly in a very bad state, but she was in the best hands that she could have been in at the time. So authorities, well, the new detectives at least on the case, decided to go and interview Joey because they had yet to speak to him, from my understanding, and they also had not been in the home. So they wanted to talk to him, get his version of what was going on, and also they wanted him to show them these different locations that he was claiming Melissa fell and got these injuries. So Joey elaborated a bit about Melissa taking his car. That was one of the first conversations that they had when I was listening to the interviews. He said kind of like a very open-ended story. He didn't really say when she took the car, what she said happened, if she even agreed that she took it, just that he believed she took her car while she was intoxicated and crashed it and destroyed most of the driver's side of the vehicle. And he said that he even went around to different grocery stores in the area because there was red paint on the side of his car, and he was trying to figure out if she maybe hit a pole somewhere or what exactly happened, but he couldn't ever really figure it out. He also said that on the 29th, the day where she kind of became bedridden for about a week, that something else had happened, something that he never mentioned to the authorities, basically the first time that they spoke to him. He said that early morning on the 29th, I think it was like 12:31 in the morning, he reached over and didn't feel Melissa there. And he went on to say that he always woke up when Melissa woke up because she made a lot of noise and moved a lot. It always disturbed him. But despite saying he always woke up, he said that he didn't wake up this time, and that there were also numerous times where he would wake up and she would have fallen in the middle of the floor and he would find her like that. So I don't know if he would or wouldn't wake up. He said both ways. Either way, he said he didn't wake up this night, and he just noticed when he reached over and she wasn't there. And so he walked around the house, and then he specifically stated he walked outside to the front porch, he flipped on the light, and then he looked and saw Melissa in the back seat of the car. And her head was on the side of the driver's side, and then her feet were on the passenger side. So he claimed that when he found her, she wasn't unconscious and she wasn't asleep. She was just very heavily intoxicated, and that she was fully naked. He said that she had obviously fallen because the side of her face was very red, but that she wasn't bleeding or anything like that. And he believed that she came out there drunk, basically, and had fallen on the slab of concrete for the carport, which was only a few inches, and that she might have smacked into the doghouse that's on or underneath the carport, or there's like a metal pole there. And then I guess after falling, he's claiming that she then walked around to the other side of the car, got in and shut the door and just kind of laid there. And I guess this is kind of what started, again, her week-long period where she was in and out of bed. He then elaborated, and that also, by the way, happened on a Monday. So he then elaborated on the fall in the bathroom that occurred on October 3rd, which was only a few days later. I think it was like a Monday incident and then a Friday incident, and then she was hospitalized the following Wednesday. So he said that he came home and saw this bathroom door shut and the water running. I've already told you guys a little bit about that. And that when he opened it, the bathtub was overflowing. It just started to, and she was laying pinned between the bathtub and the toilet with her shoulder down, and that it was clear she had tried to get herself up and just didn't have the energy to, because I guess they had a few things resting on the back of the toilet that had fallen off and broken. So he ended up helping her up and cleaning her off and then putting her in bed. He said that her chin was red from this fall and that her lip appeared to be kind of messed up and raw, and that she had redness again on her face. And he did, in fact, show authorities, from what I'm gathering from the interviews, it was just audio, so I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like he showed them like the towels she had tried to use to clean up. He said that he washed them a few times. He also said that she fell on a plastic trash can, like that's what her face hit, and he showed them that as well. And according to Marianne, her mother, Joey did call her that night about this incident, but just said that she fell and he put her in bed, and didn't really mention that this was a huge issue that had happened 2 times, that she had fallen and hurt herself that week, or that she was badly bruised and hurt. He kind of really downplayed the scenario, which seems to be the exact same thing that he did when authorities first came to the home. Now, I definitely have a few questions after hearing this information, just based off of other things that I know. And the first of which being, he said that by his own admission, she had been in bed from the 29th up until that point. So the Monday, week prior, up until the next following week on Wednesday when she was hospitalized. But I've also heard that her probation officer saw her the week prior to her hospitalization. Now, I don't know if it was the Monday before she fell. I don't know anything about it. But he did say it was Monday the 29th at 1 in the morning. So I'm assuming it was early Monday morning, like it had just turned Monday. So I'm very curious to know if John Murray, her probation officer, when he saw her, noticed these, scratches and things all down her face that Joey claimed she had from falling off the carport. And then if he did see her that week, and the only thing that really stuck out in his mind was how intoxicated she was, that means over the span of a week, or at least however long it had been since they had met, that she ended up with this gigantic new bruise on her neck, a broken jaw in 2 places, a black eye. And so did all of that then occur because of the one fall in the bathroom? If she was sitting on the toilet or trying to clean up, I can't imagine she fell very far. And I'm not sure how she would have broken her jaw, especially if it was like a wedged situation where she got stuck fairly quickly. It's not adding up. And honestly, all of these interviews also just kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I know it's innocent until proven guilty, but it seemed like they were just talking like friends, like the detectives and Joey. And obviously, yeah, you don't want to really intimidate this guy that you think could be involved in, what happened to her, but you also don't be his best friend. It seemed throughout the entire interviews that they were talking to him about his chickens. I mean, they were talking to him about the most random things more than they were talking to him about Melissa and having him explain the situation. And it also seemed like every single time Joey would get to something that was questionable or the detectives would ask him something that was questionable, one of them would veer off totally in the other direction. It's like the detectives would totally get off topic or Joey would, and it was never, I was left feeling like, wait a minute, what was the answer to that question? On the 17th, Melissa ended up having to undergo surgery again, and at this point they also found that she was suffering badly from necrosis. So her brain was just dying, and it was popping up more and more every single day. I do know that after this surgery, she was conscious for a little bit and she was able to speak, but she really was still very much so out of it during her entire hospital stay. Then by early November, Melissa ended up developing a bacterial pneumonia, and from there she rapidly declined. By late November, she had yet another surgery because they detected hydrocephalus, so she had spinal fluid that was pooling in her brain and they needed to relieve some of that pressure. But her body was just not healing. She began to have seizures that were occurring daily, and then they went from occurring daily to occurring every couple of minutes. And after it was found that it was not likely that Melissa was going to recover, on December 17th, they had to make the very difficult decision, her family did, to take Melissa off of life support. So at 6:58 p.m., after 9 long weeks of fighting for her life, Melissa was pronounced dead. Authorities had apparently come to the hospital at some point during all of this to do a follow-up interview with Melissa, but they chose to come after one of her surgeries. So clearly, she's already going through a lot. There's a lot of trauma. There's surgery, there's medication. So when they asked her questions, she was just ping-ponging all over the place. She initially said that she believed all of her injuries were from a car accident, and then she changed it to saying that she had no idea how her injuries occurred, and then she finally said that she was just clumsy and she fell a lot, and maybe that's how all of this happened. Now, because she was not able to really give a straight story, authorities decided that they would come back whenever she healed, but unfortunately that didn't happen, so Melissa's story never really came out to authorities. An autopsy ended up being performed, and it was in fact found that the closed head injury that they initially detected was in fact the cause of death, and they did mention in this autopsy that there were scattered bruises of varying ages, but also keep in mind that this autopsy is being done 9 weeks after all of this initially happened, so the manner of death ended up being found undetermined. And I think the fact that it had been so long, they weren't able to say for sure that this wasn't foul play or, due to the actions of someone else, because so many of those indicators would have been healed at that time. But one thing I want to make very clear, despite the fact that her manner of death was labeled undetermined, is the fact that every piece of paperwork that I have seen, from the EMTs, police officers, to the trauma unit, to neurology, to every single medical expert that laid hands on Melissa, it all says, and I quote from their own writing, possible abuse and admitted after assault. So medical professionals across the board, their first thought seeing her was that she had been beaten to that point. And this entire time, this is what her family was fighting with authorities to prove. They really wanted Joey charged, but they kind of had been ignored, basically. Within a few days of Melissa being hospitalized, her mother Marion ended up receiving a very bizarre anonymous phone call from someone, and this person stated that Joey Tyndall had a history of domestic violence against women and that he was always protected and he always got away with it somehow. And they really urged Melissa's family to keep pushing for justice because this was a dangerous man that needed to be put away. So when they looked into it, it opened up a gigantic, terrifying can of worms that no one really even knew about. So Joey had been married twice prior to dating Melissa. His first marriage was with a woman named Kathy Adams, but their marriage ended in divorce on September 4th, 2001, after Joey pointed a gun at her and their 2 children. The boys corroborated the story to authorities when they were interviewed, and they also elaborated, saying that Joey frequently physically and mentally abused their mother and that she usually had bruises all over her body. Kathy did end up getting a warrant against Tyndall for this assault, but it later ended up being dismissed. Only 6 months later, Joey went on to marry a woman named Jamie Duff, and I have seen that she has since passed away. I'm unsure of the cause of death or anything, but it only took 7 months at this point for this relationship to go downhill. And they got married, I think, on March 15th, 2002. On October 18th, Jamie ended up filing and being granted a domestic abuse protection order from Joey because she claimed that in an aggressive, crazy, drunken rage, Joey grabbed her by her hair, threw her against a washer and dryer. He then, just like he had done to Kathy and his own 2 children, threatened her with a gun. He then threw multiple objects at her before grabbing her again and throwing her outside onto the dirt, forcing her to get medical help for her injuries. All Joey was told to do by a judge was stay away from her for a week. That's it. A year later, on November 24th, 2003, divorce papers ended up being filed. So we have 2 separate women that were in his past that had attempted numerous times, also according to family members, people that knew them, Joey's own children, numerous times tried to charge him, stop him, get away from him after being threatened by him, and basically had no choice but to just be quiet and run as fast as they could. So Joey's sons also had both been interviewed, and I heard these interviews as well, and they elaborated a little more on what exactly was going on and the state of abuse that they witnessed towards their own mother and even the women that came after her. They stated that their mother, Kathy, never typically went to receive medical help after being physically abused by Joey because she was scared to. And that, again, is another very common thing with domestic abuse victims or any abuse victims. She was terrified to go and ask for help because she didn't want anyone to ask any questions, because if she said it was Joey, Joey would come back 10 times harder. So they did say that cops were called out there numerous times when things really got out of control, but it was always their word against his. I mean, these 2 boys stuck up for their mom. This mom tried to stick up for herself, and authorities basically said to them, we didn't catch him doing it, so we aren't going to charge him. So he, again, just got away with everything. But the one thing that really got me about their interviews is authorities asked them, did no one in your family ask about the bruises on your mom? Did no friends ask about them? And both boys said that, yes, people did ask about them. And our father, Joey, would tell them that my mom was just clumsy and would fall a lot. Sound a little bit familiar here? He would tell anyone that asked any questions that Kathy was just a very clumsy woman and she would fall, and that's why she had all these bruises. And then it got to the point, according to her own children, that she would start telling people that she was just clumsy and fell a lot and had bruises. It's just a heartbreaking situation, and to know that both of her sons had to witness this and grow up with this and fight for their mother is so upsetting. And to top it off, this wasn't the only form of abuse. According to both of his sons as well, he would sexually abuse younger women, even family members. The reason they stated, or at least one of the reasons why their mother and Joey separated, was because they had a sleepover one night when one of his sons was about 17 years old, and there was a friend over, a female friend of theirs that was part of the sleepover, and she woke up to Joey's hand down her pants, and it caused a huge commotion. They, again, tried to fight their father off, and he ended up basically running away and leaving and never was allowed back. They also said that there were many times when they were growing up where, they heard he was paying young women for sexual favors, kind of like forcing them into it. And then also one of the sons even woke up after a female cousin was sleeping over, and they heard all these noises and woke up and looked over, and he saw Joey, his dad, leaving the room, and their cousin was there with her underwear down and the blanket pulled up. And it's just, you guys, it's a freaking nightmare to know that someone like this can just walk around. And because when you're this manipulative, as it seems Joey was, and you are this secretive about things and you know exactly how to scare people into doing what you want, it's so easy for victims to just be trapped into silence. And this is why so many abusers get away with everything. And they might seem like great people to others, but man, if they are manipulating you, it feels like a trap you're never going to escape from. It was also said by his sons that it was very clear Melissa and Joey's relationship was purely out of convenience for both of them, that it didn't seem like they really were in love with each other, had a ton of connection, that they just kind of, she wanted somewhere to stay and someone to help take care of her, and that he wanted a new trophy, basically. She was younger, she was beautiful, and he wanted to be able to show her off and have someone to manipulate. That was apparently his favorite thing to do. I've also heard that one of his sons, I guess, stayed with Melissa and Joey for a month or two, and they never witnessed any physical abuse, but they witnessed mental abuse almost daily. They said in one particular instance that Joey walked up behind Melissa and pretended with his hands that he was holding a gun to her head, and he cocked it and shot it and then laughed and mocked her, basically. So knowing that he held a gun on both of his previous wives and that he was joking about shooting Melissa in the back of the head, and then she ended up being shot, and told everyone, as well as Joey told everyone, that she did it. When it comes to Melissa being hospitalized, apparently Joey told both of his sons a completely different story. They asked where Melissa went when she just wasn't there anymore. I know that one son was closer to Joey than the other, but he told them that she had been drinking one day and it was getting really out of hand, her drinking, and he's pretty much told that to everyone. And according to her blood alcohol level, I can totally see that. But he told them that he came home from work one day and he found Melissa laying on the concrete slab in their carport, and she had busted her head open and was bleeding. He said that's where he drew the line, and he decided to put her into rehab, and that's where she was. Now, they apparently went and told their mom this, who unfortunately had been through this man's abuse, so she said, heck no, there's something else going on here, and she made a few calls herself and found out that Melissa was actually in the hospital. But also, keep in mind what he said happened. It sounds a lot like one of the stories he told police, except with very different details. He told his sons he got home from work and found her on the carport bleeding, head busted open. But he told authorities that when he found her in the carport that she was inside of the car, and this happened in the middle of the night, and that she wasn't bleeding. His sons also said that they didn't even know that she had been in the hospital the entire time, that he just kind of totally ignored the subject, and they found out through someone else a couple days before she died that she was in fact still in there, and Joey was just kind of ignoring what was happening. Now, unfortunately, authorities just didn't want to press charges. They told the family that they wouldn't even budge on something like negligence, which is what the family initially really was trying to push, because Joey had clearly left the morning that Melissa was found. He left her in a state where she was covered in days worth of fecal matter and urine and blood, and clearly couldn't move, couldn't talk, unresponsive. He left her like that. Now, he apparently told authorities initially that he didn't call 911 because she didn't want to go to the hospital. She had been to the hospital enough. She was refusing medical help, which unfortunately, legally, we have the right to deny medical attention. So I understand that. But the problem is that he also later on changed his story to saying that he didn't call 911 because he'd called them so many times before, like they'd been called out to the house so many times before, that he didn't think they were going to come. And that's quite literally the opposite of how that works. It doesn't matter how many times they have to come to your house. It's their job to show up. So not only was he contradicting reasons why he didn't get her help, but he's also stating reasons that make absolutely not a bit of sense. So they're really pushing this negligence, like I said, and he seems to have been skirting around it according to authorities. And they also said a main reason why they couldn't charge him with negligence is because he was taking care of her. He was giving her drinks and he was feeding her, because according to Joey, just the day before she was found in the home in the state she was in, he fed her this nice meatloaf dinner and everything was great. However, I personally question how on earth he fed her a meatloaf dinner when her jaw was broken in 2 places, unless that happened maybe that morning. And in that case, how on earth did it happen? And also, I have no clue how giving someone liquor through a straw is considered giving them something to drink and taking care of them, especially because he claims many different times in his interviews, all from start to finish, that he was doing everything he could to help Melissa, to get her on a better track, to have her stop drinking, to take care of her. If you strongly are trying to take care of someone, get them on a better track, you're not going to feed them liquor through a straw out of like a Coke can. You're just not. So the family was devastated. Michelle said she specifically remembers asking one of the detectives, why can't we charge him for negligence? And he was just like, oh, we took care of her. He fed her and gave her a drink and just walked away from the family. And I can't imagine the sort of pain that would bring. But the biggest issue I have with this is that authorities just seemed so uncaring and so nonchalant about it. I want to make it very clear that being from North Carolina, I do know a lot about the laws here. And I do know that there is no duty to rescue law in North Carolina. And there's actually not a duty to rescue law in most places. A lot of places have a Good Samaritan law, which is kind of similar. We don't have that here. So you are not legally obligated to save someone's life. And it's actually a very slippery, interesting slope if you're into different laws and understanding them. It's one that I really suggest a lot of you look into, because while morally I believe we all should feel obligated to save someone, the issue is that sometimes we're not professionals and we do not have the means of saving someone, and it doesn't matter what our intentions are, we can cause more harm than good. And there's actually more laws in states that protect people from that exact scenario, from trying to help someone and ending up making it worse, because we're just doing our best. But that is a lot of the reason why a lot of states do not have these, Good Samaritan, duty to rescue laws, because it can actually land the person trying to help someone in legal trouble, which nobody wants, because usually it's just all based out of wanting to help and good intentions. But that, from what I'm researching, and I am not a lawyer, is the closest thing that I think they could get to with charging him with negligence, is just his failure to act when she clearly was in a state where she needed help. But either way, from a legal standpoint that I have seen, there's not really any way he can be charged with anything unless it's fully proven that he was in fact the one that inflicted these wounds. And I'm not sure how they would prove that other than him admitting it or her directly admitting it to police, which we're going to get into in a minute. Or if he had maybe just left her to die on that bed and didn't report it or something along those lines. I feel like if she had died in that bed, authorities probably would have had the kick in the butt they needed to be like, there is something wrong here that indicates more towards domestic violence. But because she was kind of found the way she was and taken to the hospital, I feel like he was given a way to slide himself out. This should show you the kind of broken legal system that we have. And to make it even worse, when Melissa was in the hospital, one of the times that she was conscious, her family was like, look, Melissa, did someone hurt you? Like, did someone do this to you? Because you falling, this doesn't make any sense. And she said yes. She said that someone did do it to her. And when they asked if it was Joey, she got this horrified look on her face, and she would not answer, but it was very clear to them that it was, and she was just so scared to say it. Now, authorities were notified of this. They were told that Melissa admitted to the family that someone did hurt her, and that's why she was in the state that she was in. But that is unfortunately considered hearsay because it didn't come directly from Melissa to authorities, and she never directly said it was Joey to the family or to authorities. But the fact that it was this third party and it wasn't very specific, they considered it hearsay. And I hate it because that's just how the laws work. That doesn't mean I agree with it or that I morally believe that or that I think it's right. But unfortunately, I think that's why authorities had to do that. They didn't really have a choice. There are laws that authorities are bound by. There's a due process, and as much as it makes you want to scream in this case, I think that's why things didn't go forward. The DA also apparently told her mom at one point that they strongly believed Joey was responsible and they just did not have enough to prove it. And again, as much as this kind of sucks, the due process, the laws they're bound by, I'm not sure what evidence it would take to have charges against Joey, because from what we're looking at, it could be considered circumstantial evidence, basically, because we have her injuries, but when you have someone saying it's a fall and, injuries do happen from falls, and when you do drink alcohol, it can be escalated. There's no way that I know of other than speaking to medical professionals to say whether or not a fall could cause that or if it has to be abuse. But the thing that bothers me about that is that we have so many medical professionals in this particular circumstance that sounded the alarm, that said this looks like abuse. So I'm not sure if it's just because the medical examiner that performed her autopsy didn't see things right away. I have no clue. Also, it just kind of sucks because he has this history, but while that does make it more plausible, it was domestic violence. I also don't know if that's enough to really help prove beyond a reasonable doubt to jurors that this occurred because of him. And that's why this sucks so bad, because I feel like this is just the typical way that abuse situations go, that a victim is scared so badly into remaining silent until it gets too late. And then at this point, they're manipulated even to basically saying exactly what the abuser wants them to say. So they're contradicting what may be the truth through their own words, and that goes against them. Manipulation is a very, very scary thing. And I feel like authorities saying over and over they don't have enough evidence, they didn't have this, they didn't have that. I just genuinely wonder if they even tried to get any of the evidence that was necessary, because from what I have heard, the interviews that I have seen, I don't see how you can look at this woman and her injuries and see Joey's history. I don't understand how you can hear his own son speak about him pointing a gun at them and their mother, about him pretending to shoot Melissa in the back of the head. I don't understand how you can hear the fact that he convinced other women's families that she was just a clumsy person and fell a lot, and that's where bruises come from. How can you hear all of that and see all of that and then casually go talk with this man about chickens, which is exactly what they were talking about most of the time on the interviews. I just don't understand how you get from point A to point B, and it seems like there was so much momentum at first that they could have ran with and pushed to interview medical doctors more thoroughly, get their opinions down on paper, speak to ex-wives, speak to family members, question Joey more seriously. And I feel like they just didn't do it. They just did not do what they could have that would have maybe led them to the evidence that they needed to get justice for Melissa and hopefully prevent anyone else from being harmed. And I know that the DA said, I think as recently as 2016, that they looked into it again and they still couldn't make any charges. They said that they looked into any subsequent criminal behavior and there was none. I don't know how that indicates that he's a good person. He could easily still be abusing people and they're just too scared to come forward. That doesn't mean anything. I also know that Roy Cooper was contacted about this and there, from my understanding, was no response from him either. It's upsetting. Her family had been in town months prior in June to see her. They were with her when she had been drinking and she didn't fall all over the place. So numerous people didn't see her fall. And the only place that accusation comes from and that claim comes from is from Joey. And, I know that she herself did say it a few times, but again, she typically said it was from another reason first or other reasons. And there's such a huge chance that she was pressured into saying this because of Joey. And that's just even more possible with the fact that he had used this excuse for other women that had reported abuse by him to the law multiple times before. Now, I can't say whether Joey's responsible or not, because he did also say that he was having a hard time with her and taking care of her, and she was drinking a lot. We know that because she blew a .23. So I guess, yeah, maybe there's a possibility that he just couldn't take care of her and just kind of left her to do whatever she would ultimately end up doing. Because at the end of the day, she is responsible for her own actions. We have personal responsibility. But why did he not step in to get her help if he claimed to care so much to authorities? Why did he not just say, forget the fact that you don't want to go to the hospital, you can't move, we're going to get you some help? Why was he so hell-bent from the beginning to say immediately, she falls, she's falling, she drinks a lot? It's just suspicious. And then with his history, you get where I'm going. I've like said that a million times in this video. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of pain and frustration and just helplessness that Melissa's family has felt since this happened, because being from North Carolina and knowing that this was how badly someone showed up to a hospital, like this is the level of injury someone had, and it's connected to someone with a history of abuse, and they were like, yeah, she fell, I'll accept it. It's just embarrassing and devastating and so dangerous for every other person from that point on that suffered from domestic violence or any sort of abuse, because this just sets the tone for what's okay and what will be accepted and what will be overlooked. I have seen on the Facebook page that they, in November, were attempting to raise funds through a GoFundMe to afford a private investigator. I am going to be donating to this GoFundMe. I'm going to be donating a portion of the proceeds from this video to the GoFundMe. I strongly encourage you guys to as well, because this family has quite literally fought on their own. There is absolutely zero media coverage on this, because from the second he said she fell, it was just accepted she fell, and no one questioned it except for the family and previous wives and their families. The Facebook page, you can see all sorts of comments about that. Other families chiming in that witnessed previous abuse by him. So you can't get pretty much any information online. I'm also going to be leaving information down below for you guys. I'm going to be putting up the number for, domestic abuse hotline or any sort of abuse hotline I can find, places that you can donate to help people like this feel that they have a safe place to contact. There's a place called thehotline.org. I've spoken about it on my channel before. We recently spoke about it on Crime After Crime podcast, John Lorden and I, and it is a very important resource for those that are victims of abuse. There is a way that they teach you how to make sure that you erase all of your history so that your abuser cannot figure out that you've gone to their website or possibly called them. There's so much there that's beneficial to those that are struggling from abuse and to help them get out of it in a safe way. I know that even taking that step is something that's terrifying and can be overwhelming, and this is why this is a cycle. So for those of you that want to comment down below, well, if abuse was a problem, why didn't she just leave? You can kindly, quite literally, go F yourself off of my channel, because I've had enough of dealing with that type of reaction in my comment section. If it were that easy, this wouldn't be an issue, now would it? So please, please notice red flags in those around you. Figure out ways that you can help donate or maybe offer your time to these different domestic abuse and abuse hotlines. I just really hope this private investigator is beneficial for the family. I hope raising this sort of awareness on this case is beneficial for the family. Please share this everywhere you can. I know a lot of you are from North Carolina, so please send this to Roy Cooper through Instagram, through Twitter, wherever you can. Email him. Make sure he is getting this information so maybe he can actually act on it. I know I'm just one small person, but you guys, it's me and you as an entire army. We can do something for these victims, and now is a good time that you guys can act and help me make a difference. On that note, you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and go. Thank you so much, first of all, to Michelle for trusting me with Melissa's story and trusting me to get this information out there. It means the absolute world to me. Also, thank you to each and every one of you that helps me get this information out there, and also that just took the time to listen to this video. But on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and go, you guys. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below so that you can become a part of the Hallan fam, so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.